Now, ambient occlusion, we know what we did with that before, and we're going to do exactly the same thing here. You can just multiply that over. But when you're putting it on a background plate, you can do something else. So you can take this ambient occlusion, and I've obviously unpre-multiplied it, as we said, and then I'm going to blur the heck out of my background, and I'm going to multiply the background by my ambient occlusion layer. If I just do that, it's not quite what I want, because it's making everything dark. So what I'm going to do is take a luma key, limit it to the dark shadow areas of my model, the recesses where the ambient occlusion is dark, and I'm going to plug that in to the mask input of the multiply. So now, if I look at the ambient occlusion and I toggle the mask on and off, you can see this makes everything dark. This just gives color to the shadows, so the shadows take on some of the tint of the background. And so when we now plug that into our comp, we start to get something that sits a little bit better. Now, depth of field would be bigger than our vignette, but of course if we're focusing on this model here, you would have more of the background out of focus. So I'm going to defocus the background. Now her feet are in focus, so as she's 3D, I can use the Z defocus. So I've plugged in a Z defocus and set my focal point on this little button here. Another thing we have is light wrap. So a light wrap node will take the background by default, and it will take the alpha, and it will create a sort of bright halo where the background is bright. You want to make sure you have this generate wrap only plugged in, and then we take that and we plus that onto our render. So we get, where the background is bright, we sort of get some bleed. Sometimes you might want a bigger one of these with a bigger diffuse, maybe one set to 5 or 6 and one set to 10, 20 or 30, so a sort of more fat one. Now I'm going to put that under, and now because I've shuffled the background alpha to black, I've maintained my original alpha of my CG, which means I can use an edge blur node, which will take in the original alpha and blur the edges by 2 pixels, but it blurs not only the alpha but also the color values, and placing it after the over or the under in this case bleeds the two together, which you actually see in the image. You see that happening even if I turn off the defocus. You actually see that happening within the image, so we want that to happen with our CG as well. So that's why we apply this edge blur. Don't go crazy with edge blurs. You know, people often go from not using them at all to using them like maniacs. Don't do that. So I've got this wet above, which everything is shiny, including the hat. Obviously the hat's not sweating. So what I've done is over here I have a multimatte, and I'm using the multimatte green, which is her skin. The shirt is slightly transparent, which is why it gets a little bit green. I've taken this wet above and I've multiplied it by the world normals Y. Remember, the world normals Y is everything pointing upwards, because sweat will tend to accumulate on the top. And I've just sort of graded that a little bit with a slight gain and gamma, just to kind of adjust the amount. I've kind of cranked it up with fair whack. And then I've also multiplied it by some noise. So this is just a noise node, which I've adjusted the values of, and I've blurred it. And that's just to create these sort of random patches where there's more sweat and shininess than in other places. And then I've plussed that on using my mask. So without the mask, there's shininess everywhere. This way there's just shininess on the skin, and you get this extra sweaty shininess. Obviously we will be punching that out with our pre-mult down here. So that gives us that. And of course we have beads of sweat rendered out here. So I've just taken the top part of our Back to Beauty setup and just copy and pasted it. So we've got the reflections, the refractions, and the specular, and nothing else. And then again I've copied in the alpha and pre-multiplied that, and so we get these beads, and then we can just plus those on top of her and we get beads of sweat. They look a lot nicer than they did just out the render, because you're not getting those sort of weird dark bits. And final comp, is something like that. Sweaty girl in the desert on a desert mountain. So great, because it's about pipeline, again, what I want to say is we can take this entire setup and use this on multiple shots, even on a very different background. So I've taken this, copy pasted it, swapped the renders out, so we've got this render, and I've swapped out my ambient occlusion with this one. I've swapped out a new background, which is this road, the new shadow catcher, and the new shininess, and the new shininess and world normals and so forth. Everything else just works. These shuffles all just work. And so I have to tweak a few things, one of which was, of course, the Z defocus. So I've just corrected that to be on her, so she's in focus. The other was I've removed the defocus from the background. I have removed the defocus from the background, but I want some kind of Z defocus. Now this is a 2D image, so I have to make one up. So what I've done is I've just drawn a roto shape and just given it a soft fall off, made it kind of follow the shape of the curvature of the way the distance rolls off, and just copied that into the depth path and used another Z defocus. So we get the same sort of Z defocus effect, but we're applying it to our 2D image. I've set both of these to blades, the filter types, so we get slightly more pleasant bokeh. The light map node is unchanged and it goes under, and of course we apply our edge blur, and there we go. So we've got the same girl in two completely different scenarios from the same render setup, and done very quickly using copy and paste and the power of pipeline. In this module we've completed our film noir project, and I hope you enjoyed it. You've seen the power of a tidy pipeline. You've seen how that once we did our shot in an efficient and organized way, it meant we could just bang out another one in record time. We've applied this to another brief, and again we've been able to bang out a couple of shots using the same setup. So now you can apply this to your own projects, and I'm really excited to see what you manage to do with it. There are many courses on Pluralsight which will able to take this deeper, both within V-Ray and within compositing. And I hope that this is useful within your work, and I would love to see the kind of things you come up with. So, see you around.